What's going on, everybody? I'm actually curious, if you're doing all right or if you're not doing all right or whatever's going on in your life, go ahead and type that into the comments down below because I know that not everybody has a friend, not everybody has someone they can talk to, and sometimes as human beings, we just need to connect with each other. So, if you need a connection, type in how are you doing? Like I'm asking you, how are you doing? Type that in below in the comments and I will reply to you. It might not be immediate, it might not be today, but it will happen as soon as I can. Well, that's enough of the introduction of how are you. Let's move on to why are we here? So I'm just your average, everyday Canadian nerd, back from the gym 3-hour day, here to react to your average, everyday American man, here to react to something relating to America and Canada being together. I don't know. I haven't watched this video. I'm guessing you may or may not have watched this video. Either way, we're gonna get into it right after this. Science, spirit, life. Nerd Pope King. All right, thank you for standing by. And hey, if you like anything that's going on around here, make sure to do the things, press the like button. It's free to you. It means a lot to me. Comment with your thoughts or corrections because I read them, and I will have a corrections and addendums video coming out every week. You can look at the playlist at the end of this video to find out more. And subscribe if you're not already subscribed because, well, what are you even doing with your subscriptions if you're not subscribed to me? Anyway, that's it for me. Let's get into the Tyler Bucket video. Just need to get this picture out of the way and press pull. I said out of the way and press play.
What's going on, everyone? I'm just a simple American man here today to learn and react to why is Canada not a part of the United States? Come on, guys. Be part of the U.S. Why not? No.
Why not? Well, let's think about the red versus blue dichotomy that you've got there. The Hegelian dialectic that's been put on people with wokeism on one side and gun rights on the other. Like, there's got to be a middle ground somewhere, but how do you vote for the middle ground? You don't. I mean, but between Donald Trump and Ron DeSantis and Hillary Clinton, like, you're not giving us a lot of motivation. Sorry. I shouldn't have said that. Let's move on.
I'm just kidding, but just the way they phrase that question, like, why not? Why not be a part of the United States? I don't know. It's probably a little more complicated than that or something. Anyway.
Probably. Like, I might have just been giving a little bit too much away there. I don't know. But I'm sure that there's a lot of good reasons that we're going to get into here.
From what I learned when I kind of reacted to Canadian history was maybe the War of 1812 has a lot of significance in this.
Yes.
There was a lot of Canadian history, to my surprise, that had a lot to do with America.
Yeah.
And I was expressing surprise that I didn't know that at the time, which is kind of embarrassing, but now I know better. And I'm very curious what this video is going to specifically point at to say, why is Canada not part of the U.S.? Is there a reason why Is there a reason why Canada would have been part of the United States that I don't know?
I can't think of one.
Something like that. And without further ado, let's see.
I mean, just as a regular Canadian, I like the separation between the North and the South here. It kind of makes sense with our identities being very tied to the land that we're on. But other than the wars, the British, the 1812, I'm not entirely sure we have a lot of reasons other than we are us and you are you. Let's get into it.
Why New Zealand didn't become part of Australia, despite the two nations sharing a history.
Also a good question.
And I think few nations could claim to be as close as our two Anzac cousins. But there are two other nations that come to mind. They were once part of the British Empire, who share a border, and also didn't integrate on their independence.
Oh, we're going to be talking about Ireland and Britain, right?
Okay, when you put it like that, it's like Canada and the United States are two peas in a pod. Yeah, when you look at it on the map there, look, with no border, it's like we're one giant country. It could have really been something.
These are of
Something beautiful.
course
Something different.
the United States of America and Canada. So to answer the question of why Canada is not part of the United States, I've invited Tristan, a Canadian, a historian, and a YouTuber from the channel Step Back History, to tell us the story.
Cool.
Right on.
Hey folks, why Canada isn't part of America is actually an interesting tale that was on the fence until as recently as the late 19th century.
Really? This was debated? I mean, I know the US-Canadian border, I was surprised to learn, is not all that old. So maybe this decision, if you will, that we would be two separate nations is more recent than I ever imagined.
I'm guessing it might have something to do with states' rights, and we'll get into that.
However, the story must begin somewhere, and first we must set the stage.
Yes, the whole slavery underground railroad freedom thing.
In the 1750s, only 20-some years before the American Revolution, what would become Canada was split between the British Hudson's Bay Company, Newfoundland, Labrador, Nova Scotia, and the majority being part of New France.
Right.
What did America look like? Well, as we know, there were 13 colonies spanning from Maine down to the East Coast to the border with New Spain and Florida.
This I do know. The one thing I know is the little American part of this explanation.
Yes, and France took that land because, as we learned last week, the territory claiming had to do with the headwaters of a river, and where that river went, the nation that claimed the headwaters would own the rest of the river.
Most of the population was between Massachusetts and Virginia. There was actually quite a bit of uncolonized land separating these colonists from the English speakers, hiding up in what would become Canada, meaning that there was less of a shared identity between them. In 1760,
So, kind of like how we are in Canada today with the amount of space between all of us. Like, my closest town over is like 10-20 minute drive going 120 kilometers an hour, so it's pretty far. I grew up with like 20-minute drive away from anything that I could go to, or anyone I could see, or anywhere to go shopping.
That's starting to make sense. We're already planting the seeds of a cultural difference forming that would make way for what would be reasonable for two nations to be created, I suppose.
For the famous 7 Years' War, or to the Americans, the French Indian War, much of that French territory that would become Canada was handed over to the British. Some of the French colonial elite left, but most were actually content to work under British rule as long as they could speak French and stay Catholic. Though if you are Quebecois, you actually would see this as the beginning of Anglo rule over the French Canadians.
I mean, there's an alternate history where everyone involved on North America is just part of the United Kingdom, it seems, right?
It's still quite an issue here. The British made an agreement with the French Canadians in 1774 called the Quebec Act. This allowed civil code and common law to exist side by side. It entrenched the semi-feudal French seigneurial system, and it legalized the Catholic tithe to Catholics in Quebec.
So this is why I've heard and read people say that Canada has no identity except that of Quebec, and that we just stole Quebec's identity, because you're looking back like 200 plus years and closer. But I think since then, we may have formed a bit more of an identity, like, in Nanaimo, right?
So this is already starting to sow a little bit of autonomy, like there's a civil code, common law being allowed in what would be Canada through this act. So it's already implying that it's becoming a bit more autonomous.
Common law has its perks and also some drawbacks. Like, how a common law marriage has the same laws as a legal marriage, like a official marriage. So, hey, if you're cohabitating with someone and things might go downhill, you protect your assets.
Importantly for this story, however, is that a lot of land previously allocated to Native Americans was then shifted to Quebec in an effort to streamline moving furs out of the St. Lawrence River. The American colonists...
Moving furs?
Fair.
Like F-U-R, fur?
Yes.
In an effort to streamline moving furs out of the St. Lawrence River.
Yeah, animal furs were a big trade along all the water routes while Canada was being formed. It had a lot to do with Canada becoming Canada.
Part of the creation of Canada was due to the convenience of moving fur.
The fur trade, led by the Hudson's Bay Company, among others.
Who knew?
The
I knew!
American colonists, who long desired to expand themselves into this territory, got pretty mad about it. If you know a bit of the history of the American Revolution, the Quebec Act is one of the, quote, insufferable acts that in part triggered the American Revolution.
I didn't know that. Sounds fairly significant, but I didn't know that, or that it was part of triggering the American Revolution.
You know, I've heard of that back when I was in school, but that was so long ago and it wasn't really drilled into us. I'm sure vous qui sont en Québec vont écrire quelque chose dans les commentaires pour expliquer comment ça va. Mais merci, je vous aime.
What this means, though, is that Quebec, the largest colony in modern Canada at the time, was Catholic and largely did not speak English. After the 7 Years' War, many Americans even considered them rivals or enemies, and not...
Okay, he did mention the 7 Years' War. No, I'm sorry.
Yeah, the 7 Years' War, a battle between Britain and France, which we learned about in comments recently and in my most recent corrections and addendums video.
I was about to jump on that. I thought, for some reason, my brain heard War of 1812. 7 years, war. Not
Culminated at the Battle of Abraham.
Not in Tibet.
The
7
Plains
years
of Abraham.
war between Great Britain and France. Yes, definitely not the War of 1812.
No.
But this apparently did sow or create some tensions between Canadians and Americans already.
7 Years' War, many Americans even considered them rivals or enemies, and not part of this growing American identity. That being said,
Is enemies a strong word? Just they were becoming more identifiable with what would be Canadian culture, and we were becoming more what would be identifiable as American culture.
So I think enemies would be appropriate from what I've learned about the 7 Years' War, the Quebec Act, and the Battle of the Plains of Abraham. All right, so it's all related. Let's say the Britain signs a whole bunch of documents about Quebec, and the southern states are like, Britain, rawr! And so they say, we're against Britain. And then they're like, hey, guy, just be cool. We're all buddies, guy. And then they're like, revolution! And they're like, hey, we're still British up here. So, like, just be cool, guy. And they're like, rawr!
Culture. See? This is... I've got a little bit of Canadian in me. Or at least the American... If you saw the video about... I made about American stereotypes of Canadians being very kind, for one thing, passive, negotiating. I feel like I have a little bit of Canadian in me. So, there you go.
During the American War of Independence, and before he defected to the British, Benedict Arnold did try to take Quebec. The Americans took Montreal.
Is Benedict Arnold a big figure in Canadian history?
Not that I recall.
Or taught in Canadian history?
Not that I recall.
Because he is famous, but infamous in American history. So I'm kind of wondering.
I seem to remember from American media his name is associated with traitorism, and I don't know why. I could be wrong. I'm wrong a lot, which is why I have a video series called Corrections and Addendums. Check it out.
Canadians know about him?
and tried to siege Quebec City. Then spring came and they gave up on the endeavor. The Americans allied with France during the war, but neither ally wanted to see the other take Quebec, so the issue was largely dropped. The war effort to put down the revolution actually brought a lot of money into Canada, and the tariff protections the New Englanders gave up to fight the war were quite good for the Canadian economy as well.
Okay, so Canada supplied weapons to the British for the Revolution. I can see why we were enemies.
Interesting.
Especially the fur business was booming with the 13 colonies in rebellion.
This fur business. So Canadians were trading and selling furs?
Yes, we've got all sorts of animals up here, like our beaver, our deer, our moose, the bears. Yeah.
To the American colonies? Thank you for that. I wonder if there's a historical Canadian fur somewhere.
That'd be the beaver.
In some ye olde American's attic or something.
They saw that their economic future relied on protection and integration into the British mercantile empire, and so felt no desire to leave it. Lastly, I must mention that Canada
felt no need to leave being part of sort of the UK empire.
Yeah, as people, we're mostly good with just leaving well enough alone. I mean, then there's the separatists.
Because it was profitable for them. It made sense for them economically, if I understand correctly.
Their economic future relied on 13 colonies in rebellion. They saw that their economic future relied on protection and integration into the British mercantile empire.
Oh, so being part of the British Empire would provide you all the benefits of being part of that empire, like protection and trade. Okay.
And so felt no desire to leave it. Lastly, I must mention that Canada then saw an influx of refugees after the American Revolution.
And that's something that we're well known for even to this day. We take refugees and we house them. Where I went to high school, there was a large Somalian population because of the Somalian War back in the 90s.
These refugees were mostly the loyalists.
Now that makes me want to do a quick Google for Somalian War. And we're going to see, late 80s, early 90s. Early 90s, like 91. Anyway, let's get back to it.
Who did not want to stay in the United States.
Oh, okay. These are the refugees that didn't want to be part of the American Revolution post British America becoming independent. They still wanted to be, Americans who wanted to be part of the British Empire migrated to Canada, since Canada was not going to be a part of all that, and they were content to stay as part of Great Britain.
A lot of family members are the reason why. You know, people had emotional and family ties to the English, and they didn't want to give up those affiliations.
And reap some of the benefits of trade and whatnot. And they accepted some of the American refugees. Fascinating.
You can imagine they brought a lot of British patriotism with them. Canada then soon grew into its own colony, with its own identity.
Yeah.
They banned slavery pretty early on, and had a lot of friction with the U.S. over their position as the end of the Underground Railroad. They quickly established distinct and different identities. Many Canadians today speculate that in many ways, our culture is defined by how not America we can be.
It's very true. Like, we're very similar, but we're also definitely not American.
That's funny. And it's honestly not a bad thing, coming from an American.
Oh, thank you. I'm glad to hear you say that, because, like, we mean no offense by that. We're just proudly different.
But I think any nation on Earth, if you have any kind of, humble core to you, you can say, maybe I'm just laughing because it seems like America in particular has plenty of things that you would possibly want to be the opposite of.
The exceptionalism spirit, the America number one mentality, that's like very braggadocious.
like personality traits wise, and I won't even get too far into that, but I do find that funny that at least this guy in this video is saying part of Canadian identity was shaped around being the opposite of American identity. That's funny.
Not so much the opposite, just distinctly not the same.
And I don't blame them.
One quick footnote. The U.S. did try to conquer Canada once. Among a series of other issues, the British Empire...
Oh, we're just glossing over that? Why are we just glossing over that?
I think he's about to get into it, Tyler.
America just tried to invade Canada one time. No big deal. What? It's a huge deal. I'm going to have to watch a dedicated video.
Such a huge deal that a week before he filmed this episode, he didn't even have a clue about the War of 1812.
About the War of 1812 now, because no one wants to talk about it. Yeah, it seems like America doesn't want to talk about it because I wasn't really taught about it. You got me rapping now. Okay.
Fair.
Found itself rather distracted by the war with Napoleon, and the U.S. smelled opportunity. They used a rhetoric of manifest destiny, claiming that Canada was theirs by right. It didn't help that the British were flat out capturing American soldiers into the Royal Navy and secretly giving weapons to Native American groups resisting U.S. expansion. In 1812, the U.S. invaded Canada, and after a number of attempts, was pushed back by Canadian militias and blockaded by British fleets. It resulted in a Canadian...
Hey, it paid off that Canada was still kind of part of the United Kingdom in some respects and had a relationship because that partnership ended up being enough to repel the Americans' advances onto Canada. So
yes, and recently someone in the comments mentioned that it wasn't Canadians who set the White House on fire in the War of 1812, but it was the British. And I agree with that, but at the same time, the British were fighting as as Canadians because Canada was a British colony, so Canada and Britain were kind of the same.
So, yeah, good for you. Good stuff.
Canadian deployment pushing all the way down to Washington, D.C. The peace treaty ended the idea of Canada being Americans in waiting basically for the last 200 plus years. That being said, I do not think that two countries are as close as Canada and the United States.
Right.
We maintain the world's largest undefended border.
I agree.
Are each other's largest trading partners.
Yeah.
And have a...
Oh, I didn't know that. That's pretty cool, too. Makes sense, though.
Absolutely, because we don't even have to fly or take a ship to trade. We just drive.
I mean, trade couldn't be easier than between America and Canada, so that's cool.
Pretty long history of peace and prosperity between us. Also, we gave the U.S. most of its best musicians and comedians.
Oh, very true. Great actors as well.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Tristan. Step Back History is one of my favorites.
Was that a Justin Bieber reference?
Oh, way beyond Justin Bieber. Oh, Tyler doesn't even have a clue about, like, Bryan Adams and so many more.
Okay. That was fascinating. Soliloquy.
Soliloquy.
Soliloquy?
Yes.
That was a nice video. I give you a like.
It's that easy to like a video. So, hey, if you like what's going on here, please like this video.
That was very good. Very interesting. There was much more to the question of why is Canada not part of the United States than I thought. This satisfied me.
Good.
Because there was a pretty detailed, intricate history with lots of things that could have gone differently for why Canada and the U.S. ultimately ended up as separate nations. And honestly, I mean, I guess I can't say what the possibilities are, but the relationship between the U.S. and Canada is so good that it seems like everything worked out pretty well, right? But
yeah, we've just got some trade disputes, and like that's it.
Anyway, I digress. So if you enjoyed this video, if you enjoyed this reaction, feel free to give it a like or comment.
Do that.
And if you're interested in more videos like this,
or this,
reacting to Canadian themes and ideas, news, history.
Oh, news! Yes, if you weren't aware, I do a nightly news show every day of the week. So far, not the weekend. But hey, maybe that'll change if I get over 500 subscribers. I don't know. That's a mood-dependent thing. But look it up. I've got a playlist called Nerds News, where it's news of the day in less than 5 minutes, as fast as I can do it.
All that. Feel free to subscribe for more. And until then, thanks for watching, and see you next time.
Yes, if you've made it to the end of this video, thank you very much for watching. Tyler thanks you, I thank you, Mike Janie Cat thanks you, and I hope y'all just keep being awesome. Bye. Science. Spirit. Life. Nerd Pumpkin.